Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 12th of January 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We will be joined today, live video Skype link by David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives. A lot happening altogether. We are taking quite a deep look at what's happening around the military. This is a very important part of politics at the moment. But we've also been looking very closely at the issue around the NHS, and you're going to lead off with this, Mike, I think.
So there was a debate in Parliament yesterday on the NHS, and well, this story has appeared in a number of newspapers. We've got the Mirror here. MP's father died in his arms after being sent home from hospital A&E because there weren't enough beds, and this is the MP for Chesterfield, Toby Perkins, who was explaining how his father who had heart problems in the past and was in pain, had been sent home from Coventry and Warwickshire Hospital without a scan, and that a couple of days later he had passed away in his arms, and he had been sent home because there were not enough beds. Brian, so this story of the crisis within the NHS continues, but
Theresa May says there is no crisis.
But there is no crisis. But I just sort of wanted to highlight this because it seems to me that it's pretty difficult to get MPs to move on any particular issue.
Until it affects them.
Personally, yes.
Yeah, we've seen this before, but I think this one is really going to come home to roost. So, yeah, an MP gets affected by it personally, and all of a sudden, bang, it's straight into the national newspapers. Of course, this has been happening to thousands of other people, and it doesn't even get a mention in the newspapers, but it'd be interesting to watch. And I also understand that, tragically, there's a local Plymouth councillor has recently had the same sort of issue with a relative suffering in the local hospital here. So the comment made to me was that it's interesting to see that the subject of the NHS is now coming to the fore in local politics as well. David, you get the opportunity now and again to talk to NHS people. Perhaps we can ask you of your thoughts on is there a crisis, or is this just our imagination, as Theresa May seems to want us to believe?
It's not your imagination, and yes, it is a crisis. And the techniques that they're using to crisis manage the politics and the media in this are exactly as they are in the other fields, and what we've seen in the past with, say, coal miners, steel, defence industry, car industry. It's all the same. It's the same technique. So yes, there is a crisis because essentially what they're doing is closing the hospitals. That defaults then into more pressure to the ones that are left open, and they declare under their protocol system a medical emergency, and then they stop everybody coming in for elective work. So essentially what they're doing, bottom line, is they're closing the hospitals, because even with the ones that are open under the system, they get to close them whilst they're still open, so people can't come in. So this is why you've got the problem. And of course, all of the clinicians and the doctors, and there's a great many that I'm acquainted with of all ranks, consultants, registrars and junior doctors, are all saying the same thing, that the crisis that they've gone through with their contract, predominantly their argument was that they wanted the general public to be aware that what was happening was that the Tories are privatising the NHS, and this was dangerous, and it was a safety issue. A patient safety issue, and that got perverted into being something completely different about doctors wanting money. It was never about that. It was about safety and hours and working, and the patients and the public. So they couldn't get that message through properly through the media because it was blotted out, much the same as we're seeing in the defence arena. So the doctors know what the score is, but they're very much in the same boat as the miners. So they probably need to link up with them and everybody else that's been smashed and co-opt into one bigger group.
David, one of the things that obviously UK Column has been pushing extremely hard is the dramatic change in management style inside the NHS. And one of the key articles that's been up on the UK Column website has been Towards a Million Change Agents. And this extremely good article by Martin Edwards is talking about common purpose coming into the hospitals and fomenting this very, very dangerous and brutal change in the way the whole hospital functions. Now, in the past, we've seen some NHS people reluctant to accept the idea that what's happening is a deliberate change. Can you tell us any more? Have you heard any comments from individuals suggesting that perhaps they're now beginning to realise that the chaos is driven rather than some accidental event?
Absolutely, it's not accidental. It's deliberate. It's being driven, and the management style that they're using to do this is very high. It's very high level. It's very highly sophisticated. It's very thorough. You've got to sort of trace back to where this started, in effect, roughly around the first term of the Thatcher government. And she imported Alan Eindhoven. You can Google him, everyone. He was one of the senior guys at the Rand Corporation, who were a government contracted tier one consultants. Rand Corporation were responsible for nuclear failsafe and the massive arms race and nuclear prescribed protocol program in America for the lock, stock and barrel submarines, missiles, bombers. They run all that. Now, these consultants were brought in the first Maggie Thatcher term in order to take away the power from the medical consultants. So Alan Eindhoven came into the Thatcher regime and completely rejigged the way that the NHS was going to be managed. So what they did is it's an old style manoeuvre when you've got a company or a business is if you've got a difficult manager, you don't sack them, you just appoint somebody above them. And that's essentially what this process did, is it appointed a whole load of other people above the consultants to rob them of their power. And that was the first step, and it was perceived by the Thatcher cabinet that the consultants had too much power and they'd got a major problem with NHS funding. But you can then see very quickly by some of the books that have been written by Oliver Letwin, Chief of Policy at the Tory Party, and forwarded by John Redwood, within that book, and I think even Jeremy Hunt's mentioned in there at some stage, but I'll stand corrected on that they wanted to privatise the NHS regardless. So this is where we are. This is the reality, and this is exactly where the tipping point now, where the words that I'm hearing, the language I'm hearing from doctors is that they view the NHS as collapsing, but it's not collapsing. It's been collapsed. It's not quite the same thing, but a lot of them are waking up.
Yeah, excellent. Well, if Theresa May is confident there is no NHS crisis, she's also confident that the child abuse inquiry is doing its job. Let's just take our minds back to November, 16th of November last year, where she said she has absolute confidence in the child abuse inquiry, to which we say, of course you do, Theresa, as the plan is to silence the survivors of abuse. And we are pretty confident in our statement because we're very sad to tell our audience today that the best information we've had is that Melanie Shaw, the whistleblower on the horrific abuse in the Beechwood Children's Home in Nottingham, was sentenced to 2 years yesterday. She did not appear in court. There was a video link run. Melanie has previously complained that when she's been giving testimony by video link to one of the courts, she has always been cut off. The excuse has then been given to her because she was shouting, and she says, "I was not shouting." But what is extremely interesting about this extremely harsh sentence is that the case was not publicly listed in the court listings before the case. The case took place late morning, coming up to lunchtime, but it was listed after lunch. Staff at the court were happy to say that she received a sentence of 2 years, but when they were asked what the charges were, they said, "I'm afraid we're not allowed to tell you that." So, without any doubt, what appears to have taken place is a secret hearing. Melanie denied appearance to give her own evidence in court. She's apparently sentenced to 2 years. Now, she's already spent, I think, nearly 11 months in prison, but there's no mention of the actual time served in relation to that sentence. Now, what's going on here in our minds is that the state, the British state, under the leadership of Theresa May, is desperate to silence Melanie Shaw. They want her silenced. They want her disappeared in the prison gulag because, of course, Melanie is one of the key survivors who not only knows about the abuse and death of children in the so-called care system, but she is one of a number of survivors in the Nottingham area that have talked about politicians being involved in that chain of abuse. So I just hope that our audience today realise the seriousness of this, that we're now living in Britain under Theresa May, where if the state is worried by threats of the truth, people are going to be silenced in secret court hearings. Now, of course, why is child abuse such a key issue? We would suggest because powers can use it to blackmail individuals. And of course, one of the implications that's been suggested, even in the mainstream press over many years, is that overseas powers may use that abuse directly to influence what is happening politically.
Just to clarify something you said there, because I'm quite sure Full Fact or some other organisation will complain about your comment that this was a secret court. You said that the court hearing was not listed until after the court hearing took place.
Yeah.
Right. So that is effectively a secret court then.
Well, we can probably add to that because we are very confident that no member of the public actually appeared in that court hearing. Certainly none of the people who've been following Melanie's case very closely, indeed individuals that have been talking with a legal team to some extent, none of those people were fully aware of where the case was going to be. And we get another clue because do not think that all the court staff are bad people, absolutely untrue. It's quite clear that many of the court staff, not only in Nottingham but in other areas of the country, are actually as puzzled themselves as to why they're not allowed to tell the public information which they would normally be doing quite freely.
I mean, we don't know what she's been convicted of. They refuse to tell us what she's been convicted of. So that's another example of it being a secret process.
Indeed.
So this is a political prisoner.
Well, we're now living in a dictatorship, Mike, and what is so unpleasant is, of course, that the dictatorship we live in under this vicious Tory government and Theresa May is the same organisation that is busy pointing a finger at countries overseas and saying, well, you're not running a democracy, so we need to invade you. This is obscene.
Just before we move on, I'm just going to put up this again and just read it out for listeners. Melanie Shaw's address is her prison number is A4126DE, and that's HMP Foston Hall, Uttoxeter Road, Foston, Derby, DE65 5DN. And I would encourage everybody that's watching or listening to this program to please write to this lady and offer your support.
Yeah, and I'll just add, somebody's commented in the chat box that she should be released shortly then, and they've made that comment on the basis that normally people will serve roughly 50% of a sentence, so a 2-year sentence, that's a year. She's already served 11 months on remand, so she should be out shortly. I would say this is extremely unlikely because all the indications are the state wants Melanie Shaw silenced as long as possible.
Okay, let's move on then. Craig Murray, ex-British ambassador, and he has a fantastic article here. I strongly recommend everybody reads it. Craig Murray's website is craigmurray.org.uk, and the article's entitled, Why Has Israeli Spy Shai Massot Not Been Expelled? And he says there's no starker proof of the golden chains in which Israel is entangled with British political class than the incredible fact that, quotes, diplomat Shai Massot has not been expelled for secretly conspiring to influence British politics by attacking Britain's deputy foreign minister, suggesting he might be brought down by a little scandal. It is incredible that by any standards of diplomatic behaviour that immediate action was not taken against Massot for actions which, when revealed, any professional diplomat would normally expect to result in being pinged, declared persona non grata. And he goes on to say Obama has just expelled 35 Russian diplomats for precisely the same offence, with the exception that in the Russian case there was absolutely zero hard evidence, whereas in the Massot case there's irrefutable evidence on which to act. And he says to compare the two cases is telling, and he goes into some detail in comparing the two cases. And as I say, I strongly recommend that people read this. And he ends up by saying, that no further evidence is required. There could be no more conclusive evidence of Israel's undue and pernicious influence than the astonishing fact that Shai Mossad has not yet been expelled. So do go and read that.
It's incredible, isn't it? I'll just bring this one up because I think we need to see the two things together. This was UK column back in March 2014 warning about a memorandum of understanding that had been set up. This is Francis Maude, Tory politician. This is the man hidden in the background. He sets up a massive joint network between British secret services, including GCHQ, and Israeli secret services, but this includes digital companies. This, of course, will come on to big data, university, colleges, and we even have Israel training British police, and no debate in Westminster on this. So we've got this pernicious situation where Israel is allowed to boast of its influence over British politicians through, for example, Conservative Friends of Israel. This is not permitted for other nations. We don't allow Germany to simply operate a friendship society with British MPs and boast that Berlin can influence our MPs. But for some reason, these secret deals are done behind closed doors for Israeli interests. And as we've just shown, some of those Israeli operatives, very questionable motives.
David, have you any thoughts on this?
Yeah, we keep seeing a recurring theme here, don't we? No debate on the decent, important stuff. So, I mean, this is exactly what we're seeing on the defence front, and obviously this overlaps with this intelligence issue here. But it's very ironic that that Francis Maude comes back into it again, because that Lord Tebbit had some very, very specific comments where both he and Oliver Letwin were concerned, and I think that's probably where some of the variants within maybe a handful in the Tory party that are any good are coming to hit the same wall that the rest of us are. So this isn't right. This isn't what Britain should be doing, and we really need the kind of council we had under William Marshall when Magna Carta was created in order to get some sensible settlement here, because we're not getting settlement. What we're getting is disarray and huge amounts of trouble. So it needs dealing with, but it needs enough people of the right mind and the right caliber to deal with it.
Absolutely. Okay, well, Brian, you mentioned big data a second ago. I want to highlight this article on Zero Hedge, How Globalists Predict Your Behavior. The globalists, they say, seem to have an overarching obsession with data collection. We have seen this with revelations from multiple government whistleblowers. The establishment spends most of its time, energy and manpower collecting information not just on known threats to their supremacy, but information on everyone. This is because the establishment sees every individual as a potential threat. Thus, a system without warrant is programmed to collate data from everywhere, not necessarily to be analysed on the spot, but to be analysed later in the event that a specific person rises to a level that poses legitimate harm to the globalist power structure. In fact, Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, is notorious for opening his big mouth and letting slip some of the finer intricacies of the establishment's information war. In 2010, in a videotaped interview with The Atlantic, Schmidt said, with your permission, you give us more information about you, about your friends, and we can improve the quality of our searches. We don't need you to type it all. We know where you are. We know where you've been. We can more or less know what you're thinking about. So this is a great overview article. Again, do go and read it. And on top of that, of course, we shouldn't forget our own investigatory powers legislation, which makes Britain the most surveilled country on the planet. But let's not stop there, because the United Nations at the start of next week, well, for 3 or 4 days next week, is running the UN World Data Forum. And they say that the 2030 agenda, with the principle of leaving no one behind at its heart, underlines the need for new approaches and tools to respond to an unprecedented demand for high quality, timely and disaggregated data. The full implementation of the 2030 agenda and follow-up and the follow-up and review of progress towards achievement of sustainable development will require a new approach to the production and use of data and statistics, not only by official statistical systems, but across broader data ecosystems, where players from academia, civil society, and business play an increasingly important role. So there's so much in that paragraph which describes the type of agenda that we're witnessing at the moment, Brian, as they're bringing in civil society players, academics, business, along with government, collecting huge quantities of data and using it to try to predict behaviours. And of course, this then leads on to behavioural change and the behavioural change groups that are being established around the world, beginning in Britain. And so this is the first UN World Data Forum. It's taking place in Cape Town in South Africa. So, you know, they are talking about household survey data, birth registration data, maternal and child welfare data, because of course they want to steal your children. They're talking about gender data, data on the most vulnerable. And just before I bring David in, the number of organizations and websites that are involved in this. So we've got data.devinit.org, we've got data.unicef.org, we've got databank.worldbank.org, we've got datapopalliance.org, unstats.un.org, gapminder.org, Paris 21. There's a whole list of collaborators. So, David, what do you make of all that?
It's a lot of the stuff that Gordon Welshman has warned of at his, peak of his career at Hut 6, breaking the Enigma code and talking about national security, and then his later book that he'd written, is coming to fruition. It really is 1984. The objective here is to have real-time live file that can be triangulated on every single human being instantaneously. So this world data or big data or whatever you want to call it, its origins have started many, many decades ago at global processing at MITRE. Everybody can go and Google that if they want, and then they'll get an NSA instant deep packet search for life once they do that. So this is the stakes that we're playing with here. So this global processing, that's its real name, has been going on for quite some time. So it's gradually got bigger and bigger and better and quicker and quicker. But obviously it's the control group at the top who's got access and control of this. So in terms of the access and control, this is the dangerous part, because who has got that power? And this is something that I think William Paulet was alluding to in his YouTube interview with Greer. So this, when you jigsaw this stuff together and overlap it, you can see that it did come to fruition in the recent American election, where Cambridge Analytica had a real-time file on every single person in the US while the election was going on, in order that they could be targeted and swayed, and they would know what to pump out on the mass media. So this is what's going on. So this is complete and utter control of the global herd. This is what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
You got any thoughts?
Well, the key bit I picked up on, Mike, was nobody left behind. This is a key phrase. It's no child left behind, no individual left behind. No, they mean this. This is a net which is going to include every single individual, adult, child, it doesn't matter. Total surveillance by the state. And what are we reporting at the moment? We're reporting a state in Britain, as just one example, absolutely out of control, criminal, warmongering, out of control. And these are the people that are going to be, as you say, conducting surveillance on every one of us.
Yes. Right. We better get moved through some of these now. So British nuclear weapon workers to go on strike over atomic weapons establishment pension dispute. Just wanted to highlight this because it's continuing, how do we describe it? Demolition of pensions and pensions guarantees. These guys, of course, had their jobs privatized a few years ago, and under the terms of the privatization, the Ministry of Defence was supposed to guarantee that their pensions would remain untouched. That, of course, isn't happening. And it did, just as a slight aside, I mean, it's not related in too much detail, but when John Lewis was giving its profits details today over the Christmas trading period, they were talking about how their profits were up over last year, but that was mainly due to changes in the pension scheme. Yeah. So we've got this continuing attack on pensions, but it is an interesting thing that the people responsible for nuclear weapons in this country feel the need to go on strike over it.
Yeah, well, I think there's another thing here, a deeper thing maybe, Mike, which is that the agenda is to collapse Britain's control of nuclear weapons, and I'll leave David to come on to that. We'll just follow through this this information, which ties in very nicely. What's going on at the moment? Well, the government suddenly got very excited about the replacement of our ballistic nuclear submarines. New submarines with the nuclear deterrent have got to be built. Now, you would think that we already had an organisation that was capable of doing that. We've been operating nuclear submarines for a very long time. Never mind whether you think it's right or wrong to have a deterrent. What we're looking at here is the madness going on inside government. So we're going to replace these submarines, hugely expensive project. I think it's about 178 billion. But we haven't yet got the people in place to do it. And so Defence News here is talking about the setting up of a new agency in order to oversee the construction of the nuclear submarines. And we'd like to thank one of our viewers for finding this very, very interesting Ministry of Defence advert for the appointment of a chief executive of the submarine delivery body. There isn't a submarine delivery body at the moment. That's going to be set up, but they are recruiting a chief executive to set that up, £500,000 per annum. So this is part of the job advert. You can freeze the screen and read some of that yourself, hopefully. But when you get into the person specification, we're into some beautiful language, because this is not just about procuring the nuclear submarines. This is about transforming the industry. This is about profit. This is about dealing with commercial partners. This is a very, very, very interesting specification. And they are going to conduct psychometric tests. But they say to anybody applying for this job, don't worry, because we won't fail you on the psychometric test, but we might need to enhance your behaviour. It's really scary stuff, this.
And so that's brainwashing then?
Well, I think we can call it brainwashing or reframing. And we're just bringing this. This is the panel that is going to select the £500,000 a year person. The panel will be chaired by Wanda Goldwag. She's the Civil Service Commissioner. And it'll include Stephen Lovegrove, the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Defence, the existing submarine delivery body interim chair, Rob Holden, and Julian Kelly from HM Treasury. Now, I'm going to cover a little bit more on Ms. Goldwag in a minute, but David, there's something very, very dangerous going on here, because what we can see, or I think we can see, is our nuclear procurement being pushed sideways absolutely into the commercial world.
That's exactly the score. Yeah, that is exactly where it's going. Now, I've been told by an admiral that where the two of us have looked at this, that the system has been a shambles for quite some decades now, and it's been a shambles because it's not being run by the Admiralty. Now, so that may come as a bit of shock to all the viewers, but that's the case. So this is one step further from the current arrangement. So this is going even further. So to put then the production of the nuclear submarines, SSBNs, in the hands of something like this, there's a lot of factors at play here. Really, where are we going with this? Because it looks like it could be a Trojan horse.
To collapse the procurement. Yeah. We've already had a 500 million failure in procurement over offshore protection vessels. Is this the setting up of the failure of procurement? Yeah. And this will hand our nuclear weapons essentially to the French?
Well, that's the ultimate goal, isn't it? All this is actually about the nukes. When you look at the massive amount of defence news, which isn't news because it's not talking about the reality and what's actually going on. So the actual stuff that's in the mass media at the moment, it can only be considered, in intelligence terms, traffic and chatter. But when you analyse the traffic and chatter, what you actually see is a huge amount of radar avoiding window. It's just blotting out everyone's window with a load of nonsense. So it's radar jamming the political debate so that there isn't any debate. And that's currently what's going on across the whole spectrum. There's no debate going on about this. And that's crucial. So where it comes down into the nukes, on this, because that's ultimately the big tamale. That's the money shot. That's the most important thing. It's not necessarily about the submarines. There's huge amounts of money, but it's actually about the nukes. So when you dovetail that in with all the lads and lasses there at Aldermaston and the AWRE brigade, we know that they're currently in dynamic to be producing new nuclear weapons. So you can now sort of see that we've got May essentially, or the government essentially, horse trading in absolute secrecy nuclear weapons with the EU, an EU military union. We see all this other chatter then about NATO. The French want to come in. It's more division. It's more utter sort of non-news. But this is the focus point here. We've got to concentrate and talk about the stuff that's important. We've got to talk about the nukes and who's going to have them, you know. And if May and her regime think that horse trading them into the EU as a buy-in rate, this is the language that's been put to me, they view it as a buy-in rate with the nukes to get at some kind of position at the trade table. So we've got to sort of say, well, you know, there's been a lot put to me about a Franco British-German arrangement to run the strategic ballistic nuclear missile deterrent, i.e. the submarines. So the them to say that it's a replacement for Trident might not necessarily be the case, because at the moment we've not established exactly whether we're going to be a sovereign nation and run this independently, or whether we're going to be going into EU military union or defence union. So this is the key thing. This is the stuff we've got to be talking about. And they're not. They're just refusing to talk about it. So I've still got just Sir Gerald Howe saying that this isn't happening, despite all the evidence saying that Alan Duncan and the Foreign Office and the Ministry of Defence are actually engaged in going forward with this, because they're increasing funding to the EU Defence Agency, but cutting the UK defence budget. So, you know, you can clearly see there by their actions, what they're saying isn't marrying up. It's the actions that count.
Right. Sorry, just before we move on, David, I just wanted to go back to this issue of creating a UK defence agency. This is creating a European-style institution, which, what are they going to do? Migrate functions out of the Ministry of Defence into this European-style agency?
Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. It's the same model. It's going back to the you know, you don't demote the Admiralty, you just appoint something above them. And that's exactly what they're doing here with this. You know, this really ought to be a Jackie Fisher job, where there's a group of admirals and Navy people that really know what they're doing and could be trusted and have sworn an oath to the Crown and the people of this nation that are responsible for these nuclear weapons. So that's the dynamic I want to see, where there's a foundation of some sense and sensibility, and people being loyal to the people in this country. This arrangement that we're going down here, you know, timing being everything. Crikey, it's perfect, isn't it? You know, we're in some kind of no man's land currently, and they're engaging in this. So, you know, it's just wrong.
It's treason.
Somebody said in the chat box it's treason. I'd certainly agree with that. Now, you've given one particular view on this, which personally I totally agree with. Let's come in at another angle. Who are the people making decisions? So we're going to bring in the president of that selection board. Here she is. So it's Wanda. And the first thing she's linked with is her own consultancy, the Goldwag Consultancy. She's been selected by the Queen and the Prime Minister for her role as a civil service commissioner. She's involved with venture capital firm. She's involved in a very big way with the music industry. That's linked into other parts of copyright organisations, including, I think, in Sweden. We've got her involved in a huge recruiting organisation. She's also very big on the controls for gambling in UK. And she's also, I think, a layperson on the Queen's Council Appointments Board. So on one hand, you can say, what qualifications has this lady got to select the person who's going to be heading up the replacement for our strategic nuclear deterrent? On the other hand, you can say, how can she possibly be independent as all of that is forced towards the commercial side? And if you want to visit her website, you might like to. She says some amazing things. This is in relation to music. The creative industries are one of the very few industries that are growing in this country. The music industry is worth 3.9 billion to the economy, So after financial services, music and creative industries are probably the most important industry we have. Not building ships, pop stars. And then she says this, which I've read several times and I'm puzzled. What the government should be doing is encouraging those industries. As our manufacturing base increases, it is our creative industries that are creating work for us.
That doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense to me, but this woman is promoting pop industry. She says that after financial services, this is going to save the country, but this is the lady heading the selection of this key individual who's going to be running the replacement of our nuclear submarines. This is madness.
Good stuff. Shall we move on?
I think we should.
We should, okay. This is a press release from the Russian embassy, and I thought that we should cover it because at the end they say that they don't expect that the mainstream media will pick this up at all. They challenge the mainstream media to publish this comment. Well, we're going to publish it. Basically, they're suggesting that if they judge recent media reports in the mainstream media, the British authorities are planning to emulate the Obama administration and launch an official campaign to counter a presumed concerted drive by Russia to undermine the UK. So Russia is about to undermine the UK, apparently, and the government is telling us so. And they're saying that it follows the EU summit and successful humanitarian evacuation from eastern Aleppo, brokered by Russia, Iran, and Turkey, which helped save lives of thousands of people and separate bona fide Syrian opposition from foreign terrorist jihadists, and the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 2328 on Syria. Now there's a ceasefire in place endorsed by other UNSC resolution. Her Majesty's government is also widely suspected of and expected to brief the incoming US administration against Russia. And they go on to explain why this would be and give some other very interesting information. So I suggest that everybody goes and has a look at that on the Embassy of the Russian Federation. We'll put it on the UK Column website so that at least one media outlet in the UK has published the comment, because I think it deserves to be published.
Indeed. Well, we'll follow that up with a look at our own media, and what better newspaper to bring in than Times. This is the defence editor for the Times, Deborah Haynes, and we just decided to have a little look at the quality of the people reporting very, very serious issues. So here's Deborah Haynes' Twitter page, and she's very big on feminist issues. Now, we could have a discussion about this, but she was crowing that she'd done a very serious interview with a youngster on her knee. Fair enough, maybe, or maybe not. But what her whole Twitter page is littered with is this sort of stuff. Here she is flying. She's on board HMS Ocean and reenacting part of the Titanic movie. She's boasting that she's off somewhere in a very smart jet. She's got a new pair of sunglasses. That's obviously important. And here she is being launched in an aircraft on the USS Eisenhower aircraft carrier. This is very, very childish, egotistical stuff. Is this the quality of the person who should be reporting on serious matters to do with defence? Well, have a look at what she wants to do, because more or less she just repeats the government line. Here's all the tweets saying basically we need to get in there and start killing people in Syria. So there's no doubt of what she thinks there. And she certainly doesn't want to investigate deeper into the Syrian issue.
No, indeed. Now, there are some spectacular campaigners out there, and they get almost no publicity, and they, continue to work tirelessly with tenacity. And one such is Robert Stewart, who has this website, which highlights the absolute propaganda of Saving Syria's Children panorama documentary, which the BBC produced in 2013. It was a blatant piece of propaganda. And the BBC needs to be held to account for it. And of course, they released this documentary, as I say, in 2013, just in time for the vote on whether we were going to bomb Syria or not. So they were trying to directly influence that vote. So anybody that wants to find Robert's website, unfortunately the name is quite long, but it's BBC Panorama savingsyriaschildren.wordpress.com. So that's all one word, BBC Panorama's savingsyriaschildren.wordpress.com. And he goes into great detail into what they did, who was involved in it, and attempts as best he can to identify some of the key figures in it. And in this particular article that he's just released, he's highlighting one of the people that was involved in the direction of this documentary, in inverted commas. And what he's pointing out, of course, that to him the term director is suggestive of the staging of a mock event with actors. And that's really what he's suggesting about this entire event. There's a pile of information on this. Robert deserves some support. And so please go and have a look at that website and share the content, because it's extremely important. This is probably the original fake news story in recent years.
Indeed. Well, the person who isn't going to be looking at that is Deborah. So we'll bring her back on screen. What she's also crowing about is a growing awareness in Whitehall of Russian hybrid activity and why it's important to understand. What she's really saying is, apparently we're in a terrible position where the nasty Russians are pumping out propaganda in peacetime to such an extent that we can't cope with it. So here she is just repeating complete dross, which is coming out of Whitehall. There's no analysis. There's no analysis on Syria and what's really taken place there. This is the pitiful quality of so-called mainstream news in UK. And I'll also say, of course, not even the BBC is commenting on the really incredible work that's being carried out at the moment by Russian sappers who are placing themselves at vast risk to clear the tons of munitions, bombs and mines, not only in Aleppo, but throughout Syria. And of course, a great deal of those munitions have come straight out of UK, the US, and indeed NATO countries.
Well, in fact, it's worse than that, because they're continually distributing tweets with images of Russian sappers spraying text on the walls of the buildings and effectively accusing them of graffitiing the area and disrespecting Eastern Aleppo. What they're actually writing on the walls is...
Well, they've cleared areas.
Cleared mines, yeah. Yes, exactly. David, you got a comment?
So I can only assume then that she went back to the MOD and tried to find out what it was. But subsequently, there was quite a few editorials went on the front page of the Times that, on the face of it, from the communications that I'd had with her, that were triggered by our communications here at Strategic Defence Initiatives UK. But what they did again at the time was that this was more or less the MOD party line. What it didn't do was ever talk about EU military union and what that meant in terms of taking control of our military and our industry and the budget and the operational control and so on and so forth, and the policy as to what they're going to do. So none of that was ever discussed or spoke about. So over the sort of 6-month period post that, we've tried to get this talked about and get it debated about. And of course, we've hit the same problem. They just frankly don't want to talk about it because it's political suicide for anybody wanting to take it on in the Tory party or the Labour Party, because they know it's a vote-winning killer. This debated properly amongst the grand jury of the British people, they will not support it, and that's why they won't talk about it. So the only hope, frankly, is Brill Etheridge at UKIP, that he's going to talk about it, because at the moment I just don't see any other candidates or capacity or scope. So it's ironic that we're talking about sort of this is mad, because essentially it's mutually assured destruction if we don't get this right. Because this continued argument of Russia being so bad, you can see Deborah Haynes there doing it, Well, if they're so bad, why have we cut? Somebody explain logically. If Russia is so bad, why have we cut? I'd like Sir Gerald Howarth or John Redwood or Bernard Jenkin, Bill Cash on the EU Scrutiny Committee that's just oversaw this work from Alan Duncan to allow another step closer towards EU military union going through, and they deemed it not appropriate for it to go into debate in Parliament. So that committee deemed something as of this magnitude not important to be spoken about, and they pushed it through to then go to other committees to then continue to scrutinise it. It's just a stalling. So there's a couple of bits up on our Twitter feed about that, about those two instances, and the Alan Duncan letter that's gone back to Veterans for Britain on this subject. So I suggest, if you want to have a look at what Alan Duncan in the Foreign Office thinks about EU military union and whether it's important or not, do have a look. It's worth a read because it's more just utter piffle, frankly.
Okay, well, let's move on because good news, everybody. The UK has taken command of NATO's response force and its flagship Very High Readiness Joint Task Force. UK forces have taken command of these, committing thousands of troops, according to the government, to be on standby and ready to deploy within days. Try to keep straight face there, David. Defence Minister Earl Howe witnessed the handover to the UK's Allied Rapid Reaction Corps at an official ceremony at its headquarters in Imgem Barracks, Gloucestershire. This includes 3,000 troops standing ready, supported by NATO allies, to respond to any threat to the alliance. So what did Michael Fallon say, Defence Secretary? He said, with the alliance's second biggest and rising defence budget, Britain is at the heart of NATO. In heading up the Joint Defence Force, the UK is taking another leading position in NATO and is sending a clear message that Britain is stepping up to our global defence commitments. The UK Armed Forces stand ready at a moment's notice to defend our allies and protect British national interest. So there you go, David. Once you stop laughing in 5 seconds, just give us a quick comment.
Just utter reality check, please, Mike Fallon. This is just drivel you're coming out with here, because the reality is completely different. You're cutting, you're getting rid of principal assets. We're now talking about, more Navy cuts, more cuts to the Royal Marines. So, sorry, you're doing the talk, but you're definitely not doing the walk.
Okay, well, just to end off, I think maybe we have this from the Commonwealth. This apparently, the Commonwealth has a new theme for the year, and this 2017 is the year of peace. So each year a theme is chosen for Commonwealth Day, and the theme informs events to mark the day and helps guide the activities of Commonwealth organisations throughout the year. And 2017 is going to be a peace-building Commonwealth. They say that at a time of increasing instability and uncertainty in the world, the Commonwealth family of nations, in its rich diversity, becomes an ever more needed source of strength and hope for all its members. Now, of course, we have been highlighting the use of the Commonwealth as a mechanism to drive global governance in recent years. But of course, the question that we've always asked is it the Commonwealth or the United Nations which will be the main focus? And it looks like the answer is both, because, of course, it's just a coincidence that the same agenda is operating through the United Nations. This is the new Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and his 5-year term began on the 1st of January. And he's urging the international community to respond to recent crises by committing to a more diplomatic and peaceful 2017. And he's doing that, but he's arguing that we must focus on the basics: stronger institutions, more resilient societies, more open societies, perhaps. Nobody left behind. And he said, I think it would be naive to say that 2017 will be a year of peace, but at least it's our obligation to do everything we can to make it a year for peace. And he coined the phrase peace continuum, which everybody's getting very excited about, because he's creating a peace continuum for 2017.
So we're in a permanent state of war, violence, death and destruction, but that will now be known as the peace continuum. I think we should end there. David, thank you very much for joining us. We've got a lot to talk about what's happening with these defence issues and the EU at the moment. Great deceit by the British government. We'll have a look at that another time. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to also for all our viewers and listeners today. If you're not subscribing to UK Column, please subscribe. We need your support to do what we do. And we want to expand the range of information and, of course, the number of guests that we can get on. So we can only do that with your ongoing support. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.